Hey guys, I want to thank you so much for being first listeners to this on the podcast, or if you're watching this live. I want to invite you guys as a thank you to be a guest on the show. So all you need to do is send me an email. The email is guest@investingyourselfpod.com. In the subject, say podcast series guest, and in the body, just say, hey, who you are, what your podcast is, where you're about. Send me 3 episodes you think I'll enjoy listening to, and then I'll reach out to you and we'll schedule a time for you to be on the show. So remember, that's guest@investingyourselfpod.com. And I look forward to listening to your podcast and then learning about you. So without further ado, let's listen into today's show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Invest in Yourself, the podcast series. I am, of course, your host with the most, the podcast mogul, Phil Better. And today I am happy to have on the podcast the host and creator of Meanwhile back on the podcast, Frank Maguire. Frank, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited to talk to you.
All right, Frank, you have over 113 episodes of your podcast.
Yep.
How did you get started and why? Well, you know what? Before that, let's take a step back. Before we jump into the nitty gritty, why don't you just give us a quick introduction about who you are and what your podcast is about?
Okay, so my name is Frank Maguire, and like Phil said, I'm the host and creator of Meanwhile Back on the podcast, and I'm in Canada, if that matters. And I'm a nerd. I've been a nerd all my life. I love everything that is geeky and nerdy, whether it's comic books, film, television. I just have a real passion for things. I'm very passionate about the things that I enjoy. And that's kind of what led me to start the podcast, is because after a relationship, a serious relationship I had ended, I kind of had a lot of free time on my hands. So I decided to get back into some of the old things I kind of lost touch with during that relationship. And I ended up going down a rabbit hole again with Star Wars and Marvel and DC. And I really loved this new modern take on what was happening in those spaces. And I just kind of latched onto it. And when I started to get really deep into it, I found that there was this socio-political subtext in everything that was happening in this space, but it was coming from the fandom. It wasn't necessarily coming from the content creators at that time. And I'm someone who's very neutral. I'm what you call, I like to call myself politically homeless. I
Okay.
don't belong to any party. I don't really subscribe to any one train of thought. Like, I'm a very divergent thinker. I'm always looking to get as much information as I possibly can about any subject and make my own mind up about it. And what I found is like, it was very orthodoxical, the way that the thinking was being passed around in this space. And it got to the point where you couldn't have certain opinions, or else you were a racist, or you were a misogynist, or you're a sexist, or you're an ableist. And the whole, and I don't mean to offend anybody who's listening to this, but this whole term, social, I'm just going to use I'm going to use the colloquialism that we've all used.
Yeah.
Social justice warrior. The tone of like the world of the social justice warriors started to invade my fictional spaces. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? And the conversations just started to become more heated and more heated and more heated and more heated. So I literally started Meanwhile Back on the podcast to show that people who don't necessarily agree with each other on things can have a rational and balanced conversation without getting into any name calling, hyperbole, or ad hominem attacks. Because that's when a conversation breaks down. It's no longer a conversation, it's a fight to be right. That's all it is, because nobody wants to back down in the face of somebody them somebody calling them a name or telling them that there's something that they aren't, because the natural proclivity is to want to defend yourself, right?
Hmm.
So I wanted to take that conversation back to a place where people could actually talk to each other. And so that was kind of the impetus behind the show. And as I started to get to a production stage, I literally went out and I found co-hosts who disagree with me, who I knew disagreed with me, and
Interesting.
we're on different sides of the political spectrum. Saba Mir, who is one of my co-hosts, we have some of the most, well, we have a very contentious relationship on the show. And it's because of where she is sociopolitically, and it's because of where I am sociopolitically. And but we respect each other. We respect each other's opinion. And I have that same dynamic with Christina Dudamas. I'd say the one that I'm most kind of in line with is probably Brad B, and Jeff Mack. I'd say, and Taco Brown too. Um, we kind of all see things in a very same light, and Christina and Saba are there to kind of balance us, and they do a fantastic job. So my goal was to create an environment where all opinions could be heard without any shouting down, without any trying to shut down the conversation, but to encourage the conversation. And I think we've done a good job at that. I think that's something that's present in our show, that that we've maintained, and something that we're very proud of.
I
So
like how so first of all, I love the fact that you went first. This is what I want. I want to take out the I'm going to call it stupidities
sure.
of fandom, because
Yep.
there I was on a podcast, I believe, a mutual friend of us, you're friends with the crew over at Fake Nerd Podcast, I believe,
Yep.
right? Brandon and them. I
Yep.
believe I was on one of Brandon's podcasts that he has. He has a plethora of it. I'm trying to catch up to him,
Okay.
but he gets them out in like record speed. And we were talking about the toxicity in the fandoms,
Yep.
specifically like I'm a huge Star Wars fan. My
Hmm.
favorite movie of all time is Return of the Jedi, because it's the
Oh wow.
first
Okay.
movie. It's the first movie I remember
Me
watching when I
too.
was young.
Me too. My dad took me into the city to see Return of the Jedi.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're lucky. I got to see it in my uncle's basement, and for the longest time, whenever I would hear the 20th Century Fox's like
Fanfare. The fanfare.
fanfare, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
we're watching Star Wars.
Yep.
I was just Pavlovian into Star Wars thinking, whenever
Yep.
I heard that.
Yep.
So being in part of the fandom of Star Wars, and I'm not like, I love it, but I can see the faults in the movies and all that. Like, I'm able to
Sure.
step back and look at it as a fan. Like,
Sure.
my fandom, it's perfect. Never touch it again. But as a like, because I do have a movie podcast, so I can look at it critically and see, yeah, there's flaws.
There
It's
are
not this
flaws.
perfect movie, but as a fan,
There
it's
are flaws.
perfect.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and
But you mentioned this stupidity, and I think the best way to define that is lack of objectivity.
yes, okay,
Lack
yes,
of
the lack of
objectivity and an idea and an ideological bent kind of
mhm.
combined with that, you know. But yeah,
Yeah, and
sorry to cut you off.
no, it's perfectly fine, and that's a way you're obviously well read,
Yeah.
far superior to my $2 words. You're using $10 words in this podcast already, so already people, he knows more apparently than I do, or at least knows the dictionary better than I, and thesaurus better than I. Those are my $10 words. um, but I love how you, when you, before you even started, you're like, okay, this is what I want. I want to take out the shutting down of conversations,
Yep.
because if we shut down the conversation, we can't learn from each other. We can't
100%.
see, oh, maybe my point of view is 90% right, but there's this
Yep.
10% that's wrong, because I never had this, like you said, social economics. Like, I'm a white dude, middle class white dude. Like, there are certain things that I'm never going to have affect me because
Right.
of my social economic
Same here.
status.
Same here.
And so
Yep.
so that 90% may be right, but that 10% we don't understand because we've never faced it. And
Yep.
have you specifically went with people who would disagree with you, because you
100%.
knew
Yep.
that would help, one, make you a better person, make
Mhm.
you a better ally to people of different nationalities, different social economics things, because you're
Yep.
interacting with those people and you're
Yep.
creating a culture showing like, hey, look, this person's on the far end of the spectrum, I'm on the other end of the spectrum, but when it comes to this, we can take care of all, we can let go of all that and have a conversation about this specific piece of nerdism or fandom.
Absolutely. And I wanted everybody to have a voice in the show, you know. This may sound like I'm sure this
It's
can
truly
sound
Canadian, by the
problematic.
way. I'm
Sorry?
also Canadian. I'm out in
Yeah,
Montreal.
yeah, I know. Yeah.
But the way of you running your show, everyone having a voice, is very Canadian, because we're like, everybody deserves a voice, whether or not they're right or wrong. That's
Yeah.
up to someone else to decide. But I'm going to give them the chance to at least vocalize their choices.
Well, the inspiration comes from Joe Rogan. I'll be completely honest with you. Like,
Okay.
if I can be the Joe Rogan of the nerd space, I am totally cool with that. Like, except for like without the muscles and the other stuff and the cage fighting, like just
Are you sure
basically,
you don't want to jump into the cage match? Hey, nerd, we got it. We got the next MMA craze.
yeah,
Nerd MMA. There we
yeah.
go.
There you
Nerds
go.
just battling it out. Bulky
Yeah,
nerds.
yeah. And you don't fight. You just stand across from each other and you tell each other what your power levels are and your abilities and your superpowers.
Yeah, we get that
And then you
like
decide on paper who's going to win, like D&D, right? You just
yeah,
roll a dice in the middle of the ring.
we get a 5 episode arc of just going, I'm charging up. I'm
There you
charging
go.
up.
There you go. There you go. But yeah, no, it like, that was the inspiration because Joe's done a really great job of creating an environment for all ideas, no matter how crazy, how out of the realm they are. That he lets everybody sit down and speak to him openly, and he lets the audience decide what their takeaway is going to be. He doesn't try and color it. I'm sure he certainly gives his opinion, and there are some
Mhm.
biases every once in a while, but he doesn't try and overtly color you into a corner and say, this is how you're supposed to think about what this person just said. You know what I mean? And I see a lot of that in fandom, and I hate it. I hate it. Like, so I want to be the guy where anything can be said to a certain degree,
Mhm.
obviously. I'm not going to invite Superman, Nazi Superman fans onto my show
Oh, you're
to
not you're not going all the way to the alt right and saying, "Hey, come on my show to destroy the Punisher and all those great characters." Okay,
yeah,
smart move.
yeah, not those guys. And honestly, the funny thing, it would be funny to have a Nazi on the show because then I could tell him that Superman is a Jewish coded character and watch their fucking brains explode. That would be awesome.
That
That would
that
be
is
awesome.
always fun when
Yeah,
they try and take and like it's so silly with people who don't they say they know the history but they don't,
yeah.
and they have these like clear like I'm reminded of an arc in Captain America where he's facing I think it's Agent 47, the guy who has the tattoo of the American flag on his face,
Oh, Nuke.
Nuke,
Yeah,
and he's Captain America is beaten to a pulp because Nuke is obviously just a bunch of muscles, and
yep,
he's so patriotic. And then Captain goes, "I'm an immigrant." Like you do, like, and he looks up to Cap because it's Captain America, right?
yep,
And he's like, like I'm a son of of immigrants," and like
yep.
just saying like immigrants makes us better. Like they bring in different viewpoints, and it keeps us from being stale. So
Absolutely.
having that like I don't want to hear any other outside ideas. That's the stupidest thing in the world.
Absolutely.
Ah,
Absolutely. I want as many ideas as I can possibly take in, I'm the first person to admit he's wrong. And honestly, I'm going to have to retract it. Well, I'm not going to have to retract the video, but I'm going to have to admit that I'm wrong about a recent video I did about Spider-Man No Way Home because that film is about to drop on Thursday and Friday. And they did the early reviews are saying that some of my anxieties that I had about it are quite unfounded. So I'm gonna have to talk about that, and I'm cool with that. I'm totally
mhm.
okay with saying I was wrong about something because it invites me an opportunity to to find out whatever information I need to be right about something down the road. You know what I mean? And there's just like this natural resistance to being wrong. It's kind of ridiculous, you know.
I
So
I have an idea on
yeah,
why the later like more and more people we're in about the same generational age
yep,
range but and younger. I think it's because we were forced so much in schooling to be perfect, because we
that
need to get that
yeah.
A's, we need to get those B's. So
Hmm.
admitting wrong means we're not perfect, and we were
Hmm.
for 90% of our lives, we were punched in the head with this. You need to get these perfect scores. You need to get these perfect things. You can never be wrong. You're always perfect, 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 perfect.
Yep.
And I remember going into job interviews when I'm young, or when I was younger, going, "What's one of your faults?" And it's like, "Oh, I'm a perfectionist."
Yes.
And so I like that you're open, saying, "Yeah, I screwed up." My initial thoughts, and like, to
Yeah.
be fair, it is the third Spider-Man movie. Sony does not have a very good track record with the
No.
third movies.
Yep.
Um and so I understand, but I also trust Kevin Feige nearly religiously
Me too.
when it comes to Marvel. So when
Me too.
if he has any touch on the movie, I feel a little, my anxiety goes down, but I can understand, because this is like they're bringing in so many people.
Well, that's the thing. I looked at it from the point of view as a screenwriter, right? Like
Mm,
I'm in pre-production on my own project right now. And when I saw what John Watts had to stuff into this movie, uh, I got this picture of my head of a clown car rolling up to set and all
mhm.
these fucking villains just piling out of it. Like, I'm just like, how are you going to do this and give reasonable character and reasonable and plausible character arcs to everybody in the film, and then transition from that film into Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness, because those things have to be back to back,
Mhm.
right? You just don't open the multiverse, shut it down for a couple of years, and then come back and restart the story. This is going to be a like it's going to Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness is going to have to jump off right from that point, right at
Oh
the
yeah, it's
beginning.
gonna. It's what I think is gonna happen. We're gonna have. Oh god, this is specifically for my other podcast and not this one, but it's dropping soon. I need to talk to a fellow nerd about it.
Sure.
Um, when you're doing podcast interviews and entrepreneur interviews, you don't get a lot of chance to talk with the nerds in your
That's true.
life. So
That's true.
I'm stealing this moment, people. Let me have it. Um, I think what's going to happen, Doctor Strange will be at the beginning and at the end battle. And
Yeah.
we're going to see Multiverse of Madness, I think, will take place in between the points of No Way Home. It's No Way Home that's coming out, right?
Yeah, No Way Home comes out first, and then Multiverse of Madness.
And then yeah, and then you have Black. Then I'm just so like how adept Kevin Feige is in controlling this narrative, including the Marvel and
Yep.
now the TV series, and doing all of that, and it's a comic book come to life.
Well, he's got a lot of talented people on his team, and we actually got to interview AC Bradley, who is the executive producer and head writer for What If, the animated series
Oh,
that they
I'm
did.
jealous.
It was
Yeah,
great.
that's episode 105 on your,
Yes.
and it was your season one wrap up. Nice.
Yes. Yeah, it was a great episode. I really enjoyed talking to her. She was so generous. She dropped a lot of Easter eggs,
Ooh.
things that I didn't realize that were happening in the show, or things that they had talked about in the writers' room that I didn't know about. So that was really cool to get out to our listeners. So that was very exciting. Um, but yeah,
I love it. No, I'm definitely going to be listening to that episode right
cool,
after this. I have to go for a walk, so I might as well listen
nice,
to a great episode and get
nice.
some hints about an amazing series. Like I'm loving
What if
loving
was
what.
great? What if
Yeah.
was
Oh.
great? Yeah.
Um. So your why was because you wanted an open place where people could discuss
Yep.
their different theories of fandom and
Yep.
keep the BS out of it. Pretty much, be be friendly enough that we can have this open this discussion, so that we're not yelling at each other and breaking down and creating a bigger rift that has happened in society. Um, with your 113 episodes going on,
hmm
what has been maybe a pain point that you've hit and you've been able to overcome in some different way?
Probably getting interviews with the right people, without a doubt. And all it really took was just smashing the phone, man. That's all it really is. It's a game of numbers. It's all law of averages. I come from an extensive sales background, and I've heard the term law of averages all my life. It didn't matter where I was selling, who I was selling for. Law of averages is like this. It's this term that people just kind of lean on if they're in sales, and I kind of forgot it when I started doing this. And I just, I just eventually said to myself, let it, just let's just make phone calls, let's send emails, and let's kind of see what happens. I'd say that was definitely a pain point. The other pain point I think we hit um, was trying to figure out the best path to go in terms of um, our podcast aggregator, like who to sign up with.
The host.
Yeah, the host, just trying to figure out who was like the best value for the money, trying to figure out, who would deliver us the best value, and having to try and sift through all like these product offerings for podcast creators now, just trying
Mhm.
to get all that done. And yeah, I'd say those were some pretty challenging things. The rest of it kind of falls into my natural wheelhouse. I consider myself a pretty creative person. Like I said, I'm in the midst of pre-production on a feature film right now. I've written a couple scripts for some TV pilots, not that have been in production or anything, and I just love podcasting. I just love it. I love talking about this stuff. I think, if you listen to any of my episodes, I'm at the top of the show telling you exactly what the episode's going to be about every episode, and I lead all the conversations, the majority of them. I've had Saba lead like three or four here and there, and I think we'll have Jeff at some point do something. But it's basically, it's my baby. So
No, I feel you.
yeah,
It's your first child, if you will, when it comes to like podcasting. I look at it as you're birthing a child. You're birthing some creative endeavor into the world, and
yep,
it's scary as all hell. Um,
absolutely,
but I do like what you mentioned it, the law of averages when it comes to getting the guests. It's you have to do that outreach. You have to connect with those people that can put you
yep,
in touch.
yep,
I'm wondering. Recently, a few months ago, I actually had Travis Chappell. He's the host of Grow Your Network,
cool,
a podcast that's specifically talking about how to network and get these amazing guests. He's been able to have people like Grant Cardone, Molly Bloom, John Lee Dumas, as well as he just recently interviewed Shaq.
nice,
Yeah, this is a guy
wow,
who comes from like humble door-to-door salesman beginnings and is now growing. He has this amazing website called Guestio, which
okay,
allows you to book high profile guests. It's
cool,
mainly geared towards more entrepreneurial people,
right,
uh, but I believe they may have some science fiction and nerd people in it, obviously.
nice,
But you can get someone like Les Brown, this amazing public speaker, like this guy who's done TEDx and made millions of dollars
hmm,
on your podcast. Instead of doing that hard work of networking to get him on, you just pay him. But also that can help you because you've had some amazing people. Like you've already had two two writers who work for Marvel.
yep.
You had Jason Aaron and you had AC Bradley on. Using those names, you could probably get a lot more people.
Yeah, no, I know I can, and it's just like right now we're in the midst of we're actually doing a format shakeup right now.
Ooh.
Yep. We're doing a format shakeup. We're trying to inject a little, like, one thing I'd say we've done a poor job of is trying to find a way to inject our personality into the show a little bit more, like just kind of play on some of our natural strengths.
Mhm.
Like there are some considerable age differences on our show, and we want to kind of find a fun segment to kind of showcase that a little bit, so we want to kind of play that up. Like I said, earlier, Saba and I are kind of an attraction on the show whenever we're on the same episode together, and the fans know, if the fans know it's a topic that we're going to disagree on, they literally tune in just to wait for us to kind of go head to head.
that's
um
that's 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 great.
yeah, yeah, and we want to lean into that as well. Not in a disingenuous way. It's just that Sab and I are both very passionate people, and we want to have more conversations between the two of us, because we just want to kind of see that passion kind of be you know more developed out. So
No, that's a great thing. Like having that attracted value, it means people are going to tune in each episode to
yeah,
see whether or not you guys have a not a heated, but a debate on a subject so that you
yeah,
guys can see who's right, not who's right and who's wrong, but
yeah,
whose points are maybe a bit more valid that you can agree with, um,
Exactly.
while still staying friendly. Obviously, you guys are still you must be friendly
Yep.
after 113 episodes.
We are.
Um,
Yep.
so that's great to see how you, even though you guys are on different sides of a political spectrum, you can still come together and be friendly enough for the to work on this. I do
We
want to
have
get
to,
your
or we be hypocrites. Like,
exactly,
yeah,
because
yeah.
your thing is a safe space for everybody to come in and talk, and
Yep.
I think I know when we were younger, safe space was thrown around a lot and it was kind of maybe made fun of. But I think you're bringing in the true value of what a safe space is. It's you're allowed to come and talk about your opinions, your ideas without being criticized, without being told that you're wrong. But you also have to be open to defending them so
Yeah.
that you people can have this friendly discourse without develop dropping into grade school schoolyard bullying type mentality.
Yeah. The modern definition of safe space is certainly more where you're protected from being criticized for
Mhm.
having the wrong ideas, or where your ideas are not like
Accepted.
you're protected from your ideas being challenged, right? And that's definitely not what I'm trying to do. I want all ideas to just be open for like to be scrutinized. Like, good ideas can survive being scrutinized
Mhm.
because good ideas will always survive being scrutinized. Bad ideas, when they're scrutinized, they fall apart. And that's
Yeah.
the nature of a bad idea. It starts to fall apart as you start to poke holes in it. And then it becomes an even worse idea. And then it just becomes a dismissed idea, which is where we need to get some of the ideas is, like there's too many, like, we live in a society right now where every idea has equal value, and that's just not the way it is. Like
No.
that's just not the way it is. Like, not every idea has equal value. And we're getting to a place where we're trying to intellectually and psychologically protect everybody, and that's just not going to lead to good things. It's not going to lead to good things. Like, people need to be challenged. People need to come up against resistance, and ideas are certainly fall into that category as well. They need to be challenged. They need to be scrutinized, because if they're not scrutinized, then they stay at the same level as a good idea, and you never know what the good idea or bad idea is. So there you go.
I fully agree with you, and I feel that we should bring the kind of like the scientific method over to
Of course.
ideas.
Of
Like
course.
we need the peer reviewing of those ideas. Like, because I can have an idea, but if I don't
Mhm.
share with anybody, it's not peer reviewed. I can't tell if it's a bad or great idea, like you just
Right.
said. So
Right.
being able to have that scientific, like bring the scientific method over
Yep.
and understand how powerful that is, because it's you're working with people who are similar to you but they're trying to get the same results as you and see the world through your lens so that they can say yes or no if it's valid. So I love that you're trying to bring that over to with the podcast and spread that out. um
Absolutely.
we're coming up to near the end of the show, and it's been a pleasure talking with you, Frank, and I'm hoping to have more conversations with you about nerdism, because more nerd stuff is better.
Yeah,
um
man. Let's do it.
I do want to ask you about a podcast
Sure.
that you listen to, and I'm going to ask you to refrain from referring to any podcast that you produce or you are
Sure.
exclusively on, as well as any podcasts I know. I know I have so many amazing podcasts, but please, my audience doesn't need more people telling them to listen to my stuff. But a podcast that you'd suggest someone may be listening to in the nerd world.
Okay. Um. Okay. Uh, So I've already talked about Rogan. So
Mhm.
that's something I won't reference again. If you're talking about the nerd world, I would say Imaginary Worlds. The Imaginary
Ooh.
Worlds podcast is really good because the host, I can't remember the dude's name. I feel ashamed at this point, but
Hold on,
I can't
hold
remember
on,
the
hold
dude's
on.
names. But he puts different topics in the in fandom into a very interesting lens where he explores it from a more kind of documentary kind of style place,
Hmm.
and he digs into all of the ideas. He brings in a lot of supporting narratives from different points of view, whether they be writers, whether they be philosophers, whether they be artists, and he just creates a very cool narrative around the subjects that he talks about. Like that's definitely one of the ones that's a regular go-to for me as far as that space goes. Honestly, as far as other stuff in the nerd space, I really try and avoid them, and I'll tell you why. Is that I don't want them to bleed into my podcast. Not that I don't want
Understandable.
them on my podcast. I would love to sit down with a bunch of these people. I definitely see the fake nerd guys and us getting on a show at some point for sure. The Geek Awakens guys. There's a number of podcasts I would love to sit down and talk to, but I just don't want, like, I try and make sure that every time I come behind the microphone is I have a fresh take on something, because I don't want to try and recycle somebody's ideas. There's a lot of guys in my space, or a lot of content creators in my space that just literally just mine Reddit for other people's opinions and then try and pass them off as their own. And I see a lot of these guys getting called out for it now. And I definitely don't want to be one of those dudes where I hear something on another podcast and it subconsciously seeps into my narrative and then I present it as my own. I don't want to do that. So I try and avoid that. But yeah.
No, I love that. Sorry.
You're
No,
good.
that's perfectly all right. Like, I know a lot of podcasters who step out of their niche specifically so that it doesn't bleed over,
Yeah.
and they don't have that problem of being called out. Like, you didn't actually do this. This was someone else's thing.
Yeah.
Um, we're coming since we are coming to the end. I'm
Sure.
looking at the imaginary worlds, and it does look interesting. It's hosted by, and I wanted to know this. It's hosted by Eric Molinsky.
That's him. Yep.
Yeah. And this episode is on the Crumpus. So that's scary, just looking at these pictures online. But yes, Frank, I'm going to jump off screen here. I'm going to give you the last 5 minutes. Let my audience know where they can
Cool.
connect with you, to listen to your podcast. Maybe if you have any, connect with you on Instagram and all those places.
Sure.
So, sir, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, guys, listen, thanks for listening to this episode. I appreciate you joining in this conversation. If you want to check us out if you want to check out everything Meanwhile Back on the podcast, the best way to do that is to go to solo.to/meanwhile pod. It's basically just a placeholder for our website as we're building it right now, but you can find all of our social spaces: Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. You can find that there. And it also has a module for our episodes. So you can actually click right from that page into our episodes. And we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Google Podcasts, we're on all your major podcast platforms. We would love if you guys would check our show out. We got some really cool content. We do everything from Marvel to DC to Star Wars to anime, sci-fi, fantasy. We touch on everything, and we always try to call it right down the middle and allow you guys to decide how you feel about what we're giving you. So thank you so much for listening. And yeah, hope we guys see you guys on our side soon.
Frank, thank you so much for being here and sharing your nerd mind with us here on the episode, and sharing some of the amazing events that you've had on your podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, in the show notes will be links to Frank's podcast. Meanwhile, Back on the podcast. Please do check it out. Make sure you like and subscribe to them, because, hey, if you're a fan of nerds and want to see the different points of views being respectively talked about, it's probably the best place to go. So yes, please check out the links in the show notes down below. I thank you all, and remember to invest in yourself. Hey, everybody, I want to thank you so much for watching the show and listening to the podcast. As a thank you, remember, you can always head over to my website, feelbetterinc.com, and get free 15 minutes with me to talk about how you can grow your podcast, how to monetize your podcast, or even how to start your podcast. I have helped lots of people, and I want to help you do the same for your business or just for your personal brand. So again, that is feelbetterinc.com. Head over there, book your free 15 minutes, and it'll be a pleasure to help you out. Have a good night, and remember to invest